total value of goods and services produced by the residents, which means by the citizens, by the people who are residing in India, the income that is earned by the foreign nationals in India is not counted. For my day-to-day life, for my day-to-day living is where the consumption expenditure comes into picture. So GNP is quite broader in nature. That is where GNP becomes a very, very important thing to talk about. Good morning and welcome to the session 4 in Business Decision Theory in Unit 2, where we are going to talk about the considerations for measuring GNP, that's the gross national product. So let's just go into understanding what exactly is the gross national product. The gross national product refers to the total value of all goods and services produced by the residents and businesses in a country, irrespective of location and production. The definition looks quite huge. The definition looks as if that it is about the entire factor put together. Let us simplify and try to understand here. It says that the total value of goods and services produced by the residents, which means by the citizens, by the people who are residing in India, and businesses, the companies of a country. So exactly all the people who are there in that country, who are working and who are producing some valuable output, irrespective of location of production. So wherever you are located, which part, which state, which district, which town, we are not worried. Irrespective of your location, the amount, the value that you produce towards in a particular financial year is what refers to the gross national product. Now, GNP takes into account investments made by business and residents of the country living both inside and outside the country. So I'm also going to include the NRIs into the picture. It also takes into account the value of the products produced by industries of the domestic sector. So GNP is quite broader in nature. That is where GNP becomes a very, very important thing to talk about. Why? Because I'm now going to add the value of both the people living in India as well as abroad. So what is happening here is that I am trying to add up the total value, the sum factor altogether. Why I am so worried about GNP is that for a country like India, where there are millions of citizens who are residing outside the country, it might be the US, it might be the UK, or it might be in Australia, even those people are contributing towards India's development. Secondly, GNP will also look into the investment factor. So each one of us will invest some point, some value back into the country, which starts working towards the growth and development. So every business will invest in the form of capital to start the business and grow up. So that investment, that amount which is put inside the country for the development, for the results, for the value that is being produced will be a part of the GNP. So when you look into it, GNP is a bigger cycle altogether. It encompasses almost every single factor that it takes into account, starting from the citizens to the NRIs who are involved in this picture. Followed by GNP does not take into consideration income earned by foreign nationals in the country or any other products produced by foreign company in manufacturing units in the country. Now let's look into a situation here very, very clearly. We have a lot of expats who come to our country and work. Now, India being a global hub for manufacturing as well as for services industry, we have a lot of foreigners who are working in Indian companies as CEOs. For example, Tata Motors, or for example, when you look into Wipro. So you have a lot of people who are expats who come to India and they work. Now what happens here is that the income that is earned by the foreign nationals in India is not counted. The income that is made by a company like Hyundai or any other foreign companies in manufacturing units in India is not going to be counted, because that products we are not counting. They are foreign companies and their accounting will be done in their native place, in their registered office zone. We are not worried about the products that are manufactured by those companies in the manufacturing units of India. That is not accounted. So all the expat income will again go back to their home country or to the hometown. So we are not really worried about that factor in GNP. On the other side, GNP, known as the gross national product, represents the value of goods and services that is produced within the country. So we are worried about the production that happens within the country by the residents and by the people who are living outside. So GNP is a very, very important and a calculative term that is going to represent the gross national product, the income that gets added up to our country, followed by the gross national product, or the GNP, also takes into account the income earned by citizens of the country well within outside the consideration. So once we know this factor, let's just get to the calculation very clearly here. What is that calculation that we have? GNP is equal to GDP plus NR minus NP. Now, NR minus NP is a very, very important factor. What does GDP stands? We know the formula. GDP stands for gross domestic product. The GDP formula is given by C plus I plus G plus X minus M. This is the formula. Now, we are not going to dwell deeply into it. We know what is the GDP formula altogether. Now, taking GDP into account plus NR minus NP. That's what we are worried about. NR stands for net income receipt. So all the income factors which are going to come inside you, that is what the country is going to receive. So we call it as net income receipts. Now, NP, that stands for net outflow of foreign assets, or what we call it as the payables factor. So net income received minus the net outflow of foreign assets. So I would like to say that net revenue minus net payables altogether. So that's where we would be understanding the GDP and the GNP factors very clearly. So the formula for GNP at any random stand is GDP plus the net income receipts minus the net outflow to foreign assets. If you do this calculation, you will be able to understand the value of GNP at that particular year, at that particular instant. Now, GNP, only the final goods and services are considered. Intermediate goods are avoided as it leads to double counting. This is very much important. Why? Because if you look into the pharma sector, one of the most emerging sectors of India, there are many formulations, bulk drugs which are being created, which are being invented. Now let's take the vaccine itself. There are many vaccines which are yet to come to the Indian market. There are many drugs which are yet to come against the COVID-19 because they are still under testing and trial. They have not yet been completed. The formulation is still going on. There's a lot of process before it gets commercialized. So in that case, I am not going to take that intermediate goods because they are still in the part of production. I don't want to include it in the part of GNP because it will lead to a double counting for me. What I am interested is only the final goods and services which are going to be looked upon. At the end of the day, the goods which are available for sale to the final customer, that is what I am worried about in a GNP format. So whenever we are talking about goods and services, it is the final goods and services, the goods which are finally available for the consumption of the customer. reverse. That's where GNP comes into picture. So this is why I say GNP calculation has to be very, very careful. Now, moving forward, let's try to do the GNP for a nation. The following factors are going to be considered. First, consumption expenditure, one of the most important points, followed by investment, government expenditure. We are going to talk about it, the net exports and the net income. Just look at those 5 factors for a while. We're talking with consumption, investment, government, net exports and net income. All these 5 factors are so closely related. You cannot be able to differentiate it just like that. They are very, very closely related. Why? Because each one of them have an intrinsic meaning in terms of calculating the GNP. Now let's try to understand it one by one. Consumption expenditure. As a consumer, the amount that I spend for my day-to-day life, for my day-to-day living is where the consumption expenditure comes into picture. So I need to have the basic food, shelter and clothing. Nobody can deny on that. To have that basic food, shelter and clothing, there is an expenditure from my side. So that is where the consumption expenditure comes into picture. So I am consuming. For that consumption, I have to pay some amount. So consumption expenditure is a very, very important term. Followed by investment. Now, investment is not only in the form of stocks and shares. Investment in the form of inventory. Investment in the form of capital. Investment in the form of starting up a new business. These are also a part of investment. So, investment is very, very important. Why this is important? Again, let's go back one more time, because right now, as we are talking about the Startup India movement, as we are talking about private equity players and venture capitalists coming to India in a great way, that means more and more investments are bound to happen in our country. That means there will be a heavy inflow of money coming in, and that's how there will be more startups, that will be more income generation, more employment. So that's why investment will matter a lot. Followed by government expenditure. How much does the government spend money towards the welfare of the nation, welfare of the people? That's where we talk about the government expenditure. That's a very, very important term. Why? Because the government collects money from the people in the form of tax and other payables. The government collects the money and goes back to the people itself by making some development programs for them. So the expenditure made by the government towards the welfare matters a lot. Let's go back with an example. The Atmanirbhar plan, which was devised by our Honorable Prime Minister in order to help us out during the pandemic time, which has now been happening in different phases, has been one of the remarkable journeys that have been made by the government of India in terms of saving us, in terms of providing liquidity in the market and pushing the economy back to the growth stage altogether. So that's where government expenditure come. How much the government can spend money in terms of reviving a sector, in terms of providing a push to the sector, in terms of helping the people for their welfare and development. Followed by the net exports, which is a very important factor. Total exports minus total imports. Let's understand this formula very clearly. Total exports minus total imports. Why? Because when we talk about exports, we also need to calculate the import factor. It is not that the Indian subcontinent is involved only in exports. We also import a lot of things from different countries. So once you subtract the value of export minus import, you will come to know what is the net value that you have got, the net exports value. So that is why you have to see whether you are on the positive side of the export or on the negative side of the export. So that's why we see the total exports minus total imports, followed by the net income. The net income is very, very important. Why? Because income earned by the residents in foreign country, Indian citizens residing in abroad. they will also earn money, they will send it back to India, minus income earned by foreigners in the country. There would be an American CEO, there would be a German CEO working in India. So the money that is earned by them is subtracted now. So the NRIs, the foreigners, the Indian who have acquired a foreign status residing in abroad, their income minus the foreigners earning in our country, that will give you the net income. So all these 5 factors, when you add it or when you are involving it, you will be able to get the calculation of gross national product. Moving further, the gross national product is given up by a very beautiful mathematical calculation saying that Y is equal to, Y stands for income here, C plus I plus G plus X plus Z. Let's look at each one of them. C would stand for your consumption, investment, government expenditure. Then we talk about the exports, the net exports, and then we talk about the net income factor here. So GNP is equal to consumption, expenditure plus investment plus the government expenditure plus the net exports plus the net income. That is what is the formula all about. So consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus the exports plus the income, all of them added together will give you the GNP factor altogether. This is very, very important for us to understand. Now, GNP considers the manufacturing of goods like equipment, machinery, agriculture products, vehicles, as well as some services like consulting, education, and healthcare. What we typically try to do in a GNP factor is that we will also try to include the services factor, which contributes more than about 46% today in India's GDP or the growth factor altogether. So we are going to include that factor also because there's a lot amount of money that swings inside from the sectors of healthcare, consulting, and education. So even these factors will be added as a part of the gross national product. Moving further, the cost of providing the services is not calculated separately as it is included in the final price of the product or the final price itself. What I'm going to do here is that I'm not going to segregate the cost factor. I'm not going to say that the cost factor is broken down into parts of A, B, C, and D. I'm just going to look into the final price. The final product, final price is where the GNP is considered about. So that's why GNP per capita is used to calculation of GNP, a country-to-country comparison, while it becomes problematic when a citizen holds dual citizenship. 99% of the time, most of the countries face this problem in terms because there are many citizens who are not actually their citizen alone. They belong to other countries. They might have an NRI status or they work for some other country. So what happens, the double income counting factor comes into picture and you are not able to get an exact picture of how much they have earned. So GNP per capita, though it might be a comparative stand, it might be good to do a head-on-head comparison, but it might not be accurate in nature. So that is the reason most of the time we don't take it as a perfect mark to compare. Now, GNP is considered to be an important indicator by the economists. It is used by them to find solutions to economic issues such as poverty and inflation. Before I start talking about poverty and inflation, there was a time in India when we suffered a lot, especially during the time periods of 1929, 1930s, and during the Second World War, where India was completely gone on a depression because of the famine, because of the poverty and other factors. Now India is supposed to be a growing spot for a global hub and development. It has become a sunshine spot, I would say, in terms of growth and development. Why this is important for us to understand is that this tells the earning capacity, this tells the production capacity of the country and the citizen. So you are able to now understand that it is a very, very important indicator. It goes to that extent where it tells the world that what is your capacity in terms of earning. When you compare India with some of the Nordic countries, some of the European countries, you see that there is a vast difference. But of course, that is primarily because they are smaller countries, lesser population and factor. But when you look into a country like India or China for comparison, the huge amount of population, but still they are able to grow in that size and volume, definitely GNP is considered to be a very big indicator, a very big positive point altogether. Followed by, when an income is calculated on the basis of per person, the earning capacity of per person, irrespective of the location, GNP becomes more reliable factor than the GDP. So that is why. Now let's go back and try to compare India versus Qatar. Qatar is said to have the largest or the highest in terms of per capita income when compared to India. Now, you might go ahead and say that Qatar is such a small country when compared to India. But then, the earning capacity, the income per person earned in Qatar is way ahead when compared to that of India. So that is where GNP comes into picture. That's where people want to compare and find which country, which area people are able to earn more when compared to the other countries. Followed by, the information obtained from GNP is used for analyzing the balance of payments. In some countries or unions such as the European Union, the Euro altogether, economists use GNI or gross national income. Some of the unions like the Euros have the factor that they also use GNI in the place of GNP in order to calculate the balance of payments. Now, the drawbacks of GNP, which we need to understand, we have seen the advantages, we also need to see the disadvantages. The foreign exchange rate fluctuates, therefore impacts the calculation, no doubt about it. Because of the foreign exchange rate fluctuation, because there are problems in terms of the fluctuation factor, there is always a constant change that keeps on happening. Now, the foreign exchange rate is not in our hand. It purely is based on the market expectation, where you will be able to see that the impact is very, very high. It goes to that extent where it starts affecting the domestic currency, the appreciation factor. So definitely when the foreign exchange rate starts fluctuating too much, the impact is also on the calculation factor. Followed by, it does not help in determining whether the economy is actually growing or shrinking. Now, this is very, very important for all of us to know. GNP would probably give you a stand where it says what is the income earning capacity per person in a country. But will GNP exactly tell you to what extent the country is growing? We do not know, which means the economy is growing or shrinking. We do not know the answer because GNP will not be able to answer it accurately. Followed by, the US actually used GNP as its official economic data welfare until 1991. From there, they have also switched to GDP. However, some economists question the validity of using GDP to compare different economies or same economies across time. Now, this is one thing that we have to understand. Why? Because till the year 1991, even United States, which is one of the leaders in terms of the world economy, had gone ahead and used GNP only as an official measure. But later, they started coming back and telling that it's actually GDP which will measure the welfare of the country. So it is not going to be GNP at all. It's going to be GDP that's going to measure the welfare. But still, a question that lags in the mind of the people is that, is actually GDP a true measure of welfare? Will GDP actually help me to understand the welfare altogether, or is there something that we need to look further? So that is why this question will always linger in the minds of the people. One issue that these economists raise is inflation. However, inflation can be accounted for by creating reliable price indexes and adjusting for standard values. So one of the common issues that we are facing today is that economists ask about the inflation, which is very, very true when it comes to our country like India, where inflation is at the highest. Now, However, the inflation rates can be adjusted. It doesn't mean that every time we have to keep on looking for it. It can be adjusted, it can be accounted for, and it can be taken up for the standard values altogether. Followed by the second issue is the population size. Why? Because India and China have the maximum population and the producers and consumers are many. Because when you compare it to a country like Switzerland or Ireland, those countries have a very, very less population. So what most of the economists try to advocate using GNP or GDP per capita to account for the real impact of growth on individuals. So what happens here is that for a smaller country, yes, it's okay, but there are objections because almost all the contemporary accounts of the economic size and growth are tracked in GDP and not in GNP. So economists feel that GDP provides even more composite picture at any given point of time rather than looking into the GNP. The size of the country, the population, the consumption, the growth and the manufacturing sectors will definitely have a toll in terms of understanding the values. So I would definitely say that GDP gives you a broader picture. So GDP versus GNP is always a very big challenge that we have been speaking about. But what happens here is that since this gives a broader picture, it gives a bigger element altogether, this would definitely help us to understand the scenario better. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe all the information shared through this session would be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming session, we are going to speak about the value added method, which is a part of the national income. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.